Again, he's with us on Wednesdays at this time. Please welcome John Rothmann, everyone. Hey, John Rothmann.
Good morning. Can I just follow up on one thing? I listened with great attention to the latest report you gave on the gun shooting. And I have to tell you, if there is one thing for which there can be no tolerance at this point in our lives, it is the Republican Party's refusal to do anything about the question of guns. Joe Biden has again called for action, and again, the Republicans downplay it, won't do a thing. You know the legislation's going nowhere because the Republicans control Congress. This is a far cry from 1994 when the Republicans didn't have the votes. The Democrats had the votes, and there was a weapons ban that was implemented. Dianne Feinstein and Joe Biden led that battle. All I can say is every time I hear about another report of a shooting, I get more and more upset. And if ever there was going to be a protest that was nationwide by Democrats, Republicans, by old, by young, by all who care, the time has come when this shooter was able to buy 7 weapons and there were no controls. All I can say is there is something definitely wrong. And what I regret to say, Mark, is we will probably have this discussion again and again and again, and it's just too much.
When you mention the protest, I think that that's such a great thing to mention, because I feel as though if they really did take to the streets in big enough numbers, maybe something would get done.
Well, you wanted to mention a bit about Israel. That's exactly what happened in Israel. You saw the ultimate in democracy when what you saw was a million plus Israelis going into the streets, and the government finally had to respond. There ought to be such an effort here in the United States of America when it comes to guns. We ought to have people out in the streets and really protesting and demanding action. And frankly, the holdup are the Republicans, and they're the ones on whom the heat should be leveled.
Yeah, and of course that's true. And this is, I get into arguments sometimes with my friends on the left when I point this out, but because that's clearly true, full stop. GOP to me, they're the evildoers in this gun question. But that said, with control of both houses, it was not possible to get the assault weapons ban passed with the Democrats. It was, John, that's a shame on that party also.
The pressure, but I understand that, but I want to make clear that the obstruction in Congress today, not the Democrats, it's the Republicans. And
Agreed.
This is something where the American people need to come together. And if anything, the Democrats ought to be drawing a line in the sand as we approach the next presidential election and make these demands. The power of the NRA needs to be broken.
And it's not even just the NRA, John Rothman. I'd say that there's a fetishization of guns in this country. There's this fetishization of the military in this country. We've lost our way. There's a machismo that's displaced. You're seeing it in political ads, John. They're with assault rifles. You see literally dozens of political ads with these right wingers shooting off guns.
You're right, Mark. Can you imagine that there is any reason why the military surplus involving semi-automatic and automatic weapons should be for general sale? It's absolutely ludicrous. And again, I want to point out, I believe that you could have a bipartisan effort, but you don't have a Republican leadership that is willing to do that. And part of that is the amount of money which is contributed by the NRA to Republican candidates. And I make no bones about leveling that charge, which I believe is absolutely true.
I want to go back to Israel, then I'll double back to Georgia, which I'm seeing as a question in the chat. In Israel, you mentioned the protests on the street. And maybe you can just set the scene for us again, what Netanyahu is trying to do with that government. But I also then want to ask you, is it just the protests, or wasn't it the case that some of his top minister of defense said, hey, I'm not down with this, man. If you want to try this thing where you're skipping over, you can talk about changing the judiciary, I'm going to resign. And so he began to lose his government in a way.
You're absolutely right. And I think it's very important to point out that this situation in Israel resulted from Benjamin Netanyahu trying to survive. he has a very narrow coalition. There is no government of Israel that has ever been formed without a coalition. You need 61 seats to form a government. Right now, Netanyahu has 64. The action he has taken is to try to do two things. One, to preserve his parliamentary majority, and two, is to prevent himself from going to jail. That's fundamentally what it boils down to. There are charges against him that have been leveled. So what has to happen now? He's declared a moratorium until after Passover, which begins this Tuesday evening. And so it'll be another at least 10 to 12 days simply because of the Knesset coming back into session. But he's determined to go ahead. And look, I have to tell you honestly, somebody asked me, is democracy in Israel threatened? The answer is no, because we saw democracy in action when people on the left and the right, including academics, including business people, who go into the streets. You saw Prime Minister Netanyahu's own defense minister, Gallant, take a stand, and for that he was fired. So I am reassured by Israeli democracy. We have a similar problem here in the United States, whether it's guns or the question of Donald Trump. This is a real issue. I was scared out of my wits last week when Donald Trump spoke at a rally in Texas, in Waco, Texas, calling for violence against the United States. It's just nuts. And so there's a real problem to the challenge that we all face. But let me be clear. I believe that just as the United States is a vital, vibrant democracy, so I believe Israel is a vital, vibrant democracy. And as long as those democracies and people in those countries embrace that concept, then we will all be strengthened. The fact that Netanyahu had to retreat is a good thing. I'm waiting, frankly, for the Republicans, whether it comes to guns or Donald Trump, to repeat that concept of retreating in the face of real opposition.
This is an interesting comment in the chat, just in terms of the numbers. Israel had 1 million in the streets. Population is about 9.6 million, so 20% of the population in the streets. I don't know, by the way, if that math is quite right, but maybe it is. I don't know. For anyway, I'm not really. I'm just more about the comment. For us, that would be the same as about 30 to 40 million in the streets on the question of gun legislation or whatever. You could get that. I mean, but it would be. There has to be a mobilization. There has to be a will. Now, I want to ask you about what's happening in Georgia. I saw a question. Please talk about what is happening in Georgia and their attempts to get rid of their attorney general in order to close the case on Trump. This is the other state case against Trump. Our guys, I only need 11,780 vote case, right?
Well, the simple fact of the matter is you can't get rid of an elected official. And so what's going to happen in Georgia is really a process now where there is a potential indictment of Donald Trump for election interference. The Georgia grand jury has not yet issued its conclusion, but there's little doubt what's going to happen, that Donald Trump will face charges in Georgia, no matter what happens in the charges dealing with Stormy Daniels, which is, in my mind, important because he violated the law. But it's even more important that we deal with the question of the insurrection or an attempt to subvert an American election. And I think that any effort that Donald Trump or his people have to remove Raffensperger, the Secretary of State of Georgia, it's absurd. He was just reelected, and I have every confidence. I have to have confidence in the idea that in the end, sanity will prevail, and Donald Trump is not above the law. What concerned me was a poll that I read this morning that showed that 70% of Republicans would still vote for him for president of the United States. That, to me, is absolutely astounding because the cult of personality here and the concept that the Republican Party, as Donald Trump Jr. said on the ellipse, is no longer the Republican Party, it's the party of Donald Trump, is profoundly disturbing. I was interested to note that Chris Christie, the former governor of New Jersey, who was one of Trump's strong supporters and who was nearly Trump's vice president, we should remind people, is saying he will not vote for Trump for president again. He absolutely will not. And he pointed out that at that Waco rally, Donald Trump had the audacity not only to have a choir singing these songs, people who were in jail for the insurrection, but then showed scenes of the insurrection and the violence as if to applaud it. If that isn't a disqualifier, I don't know what is. And let me quickly, because I know our time is short, say a word about Mike Pence. I was
just about to get to that. Go ahead. Yeah, please.
I'm just watching your
No,
clock.
I love it. Yeah. But just set the scene. There's just been a federal judge in D.C. has now ordered Pence to testify. Isn't that right?
Yes, and this morning Mike Pence spoke, and he said he will comply with the law. He didn't say he wouldn't appeal, and the appeal could go all the way to the Supreme Court. But it is now clear to me that Mike Pence is going to have to testify, and that these claims of executive privilege, which do not apply in the case of Donald Trump or Mike Pence, are going to be thrown out. And that in the end, as I say, it may take time, but somebody talked to me about the time frame. Let me remind you, the Watergate break-in was in June of 1972. Nixon did not resign until August 9th, 1974. So 2 years and a few months. The same thing applies here. The wheels of justice may turn slowly, but wherever you turn and you look at where Donald Trump is today, the wheels are turning. Let me also make a word about his potential opposition. I do not see a responsible Republican. Ron DeSantis and what he is pulling in Florida with education and pulling books off the shelves is one of the most appalling things I've ever seen from an elected public official. And I don't think DeSantis, were he to run, I think he'd be defeated overwhelmingly. I think that Trump, by the way, no matter what the polls show, Trump would be defeated as well. The Republicans, in order to be a viable political party, have to find a candidate who they can run. And, the names that come to mind, like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, they simply don't have a chance in the Republican Party of Donald Trump. And that, by the way, is another American political tragedy, that there is not a viable two-party system which can really exercise these kinds of issues. So if you are a Republican, you better concentrate on rebuilding your own political party, because we need that to happen.
Well, just because you were talking about the poll and the reaction to Trump and that 70% would still vote for him, there is a quest for control of the country. So if that's the candidate and the poll comes to you and says, would you vote for Donald Trump? Because this is exactly how the poll goes down. If he were the nominee versus Joe Biden, and you want control of the country again, you want control of the country for religious reasons, you want control of the country because for reasons that you associate with spending or defense or whatever concocted BS you get your head around. I mean, I think the GOP has so lost their way. I don't know that they ever had it, but they've really lost their way. You vote for Trump. That's your party. If you want more Supreme Court nominees that are conservative, you want more federal judges that are conservative,
If you want no gun control.
You want no gun control. You have to vote for Trump.
If you want a woman not to have the right to choose.
Thank you.
All I'm
That's
saying
exactly
is
it.
the Democratic Party has to stand firmly, solidly, articulately on these issues, and they have to challenge the country on this. I would rather see an election lost, to be honest with you, standing on principles that are so clear in my mind. And I hope that the Democratic Party is able to assert that. And I hope the lesson we have learned in Israel, where when an individual tries to violate the process, that the country stands up and fights back. But the same thing applies with the Republican Party here in the United States.
I'm going to mention one name to you, and then I have a gift that I'm going to bestow upon you publicly. First, the name. The name in politics because you're talking about a viable candidate that's being spoken of, is the governor of Virginia, Glenn Youngkin. Glenn Youngkin is a conservative. I mean, again, whatever the hell that means. But I mean, he's a right winger, but he's viewed as a more palatable right winger than, some of those that, you'd find yourself with a DeSantis or a Trump. Obviously, Trump's just an incompetent, self-referential dude. But Youngkin is thought of as, more mainstream and a guy who, if he entered the race, might have a chance of winning. I think the political realities, I'm wondering if you agree with me, are that, hey, it's Trump's party, as you say. I don't care who you've got standing on the sideline. The quarterback is Trump until he decides to pull himself out of the game. But Youngkin is talked about increasingly as someone who would be, again, more palatable.
I don't see Youngkin. His political record is also very far to the right, as you pointed out, and I think he would suffer the same exposure. I just don't see him as a viable candidate. Look, let me explain. Richard Nixon once said to me that 70% of a president's time is consumed with foreign policy. And DeSantis just made a huge mess on the issue of Ukraine. And I have to feel the same way about Youngkin. He has no foreign policy background. And the last thing you want in a very dangerous world where the Russians are now dispatching a nuclear capability to its neighbor in Belarus. This is nuts. And
Right.
it brings the world closer to real concerns. We need to have someone who has that grasp of foreign policy.
Well, of course you're right in terms of competence, but the last guy couldn't find Belarus on a map of Belarus. I mean, he was Donald Trump had no geopolitical sense. It does come down to cult of personality. So if Youngkin, again, just to run that out, could possibly catch fire enough with media so that he'd have that dynamic of charisma to win,
he doesn't have charisma. He does not have charisma.
Yeah.
I don't see it. But let me correct myself and say, if you'd asked me about Jimmy Carter at an equivalent time in 1975, he didn't have charisma either.
Oh, that's right. I forget the old John Rothman before he found the Lord. All right, now let me tell you what I found for you, because I know you're a fan of hers, and I'm not as big a fan of hers, but look at what I found. It is a Kamala Harris finger puppet. That's right, John. I found a Kamala Harris finger puppet for you. Hello, John. Thank you for your support.
I can tell you, having interviewed her live in studio, I was the first radio talk show she ever appeared on. She wrote me a lovely note thanking me for it. I can tell you, don't rule her out. Remember that if something happens and she becomes president of the United States between now and November of next year, she will be the Democratic candidate for president of the United States. And then what an interesting campaign that would be. But thank you.
Yeah.
You're not giving me the finger. You're giving me the
I'll be counting on your support if I'm the nominee.
There's never been anything like this.
I love you on Wednesdays. The finger puppet is in the mail to you. You can keep it proudly. And if her candidacy indeed comes to pass,
I shall put it,
use it as you wish.
Right next to my Richard Nixon bubblehead.
Oh, my God.
Let me show you. Somebody just sent me this. I think you can see it if I hold it up. This is a thimble from the 1950 Nixon campaign. My sister-in-law, Renee, gave it to me as a birthday present. So
you don't want to take it out of the bag, John? Well, you don't want to damage it? What's the story on that?
When you have political items like I have, and I have a vast array, much to my wife's chagrin, you don't want to damage it. But let me just say, when you mentioned the finger, and I'm thinking about the finger, I thought I'd really stick it to you with a thimble.
Oh, I love it. All right. Yes, I will ding array. And chagrin, I will ding. All right. He's John Rothman. Thanks, John. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.